Parenting is filled with small moments, the forgotten shoes, the after-school snacks, the bedtime battles, and the tiny hands tugging at your sleeve when you're halfway through a thought. And sometimes, in the middle of all this, it's easy to feel like nothing is changing. Like you're giving everything, but the chaos never quite becomes calm. That's where Atomic Habits quietly enters, not as a parenting manual, but as a mirror. A reminder that big changes, even in how we parent, don't come from huge decisions or grand gestures. They come from the tiniest shifts. A different tone in your voice. A new habit around screen time. A 5-minute bedtime routine that becomes sacred. In the world of parenting, where time is short and emotions run deep, habits are the threads that silently shape our family culture. James Clear opens his book not by telling us to fix everything, but by inviting us to notice the power of small things. And in Chapter 1, he introduces a simple idea that changes everything: small habits, repeated consistently, create massive results over time. It's not about trying harder, it's about trying smarter in small, manageable ways. For parents, this is a lifeline. You don't need to overhaul your entire home life overnight. You just need to start brushing your child's teeth together. Or pause before yelling. Or sit beside them, phone down, for 5 focused minutes. That's the heartbeat of Atomic Habits, changes so small, they feel easy to ignore, until they compound into transformation. James tells the story of how British cycling went from decades of failure to dominating the Olympics, not because of a new superstar, but because of marginal gains. They improved dozens of tiny things: better pillows for better sleep, hand washing to prevent illness, even redesigning the bike seat. The result? A decade of world records. Now imagine that applied to family life. What if bedtime routines became 1% smoother every week? What if you improved how you respond to tantrums by 1% each day? Over time, those small shifts build emotional trust, resilience, and peace in your home. You may not see it today, but in a year, you'll feel it. This first chapter gently teaches us that habits are the compound interest of self-improvement. In parenting, that means today's routines are tomorrow's memories. The little things we repeat, the hugs, the snacks left ready, the "how was your day?" asked without rushing, these aren't filler. They're the framework. And yet, we often overlook the small stuff because we're too focused on the big picture. We want our kids to be disciplined, kind, successful, and we try to correct big behaviors without realizing they grow from tiny patterns. James Clear shifts our gaze: instead of obsessing over goals, build systems. In parenting, that might mean shifting from "I want my child to behave" to "we'll practice calm routines together." The product of daily habits, not once-in-a-while transformations. This hits home in parenting. Think about the times you've snapped after a stressful day, not because of one dramatic event, but because your emotional habits weren't supported. Maybe there was no moment to reset. No rhythm to fall back on. That's what this book helps build: a new rhythm. Quietly. Gently. With grace. So, in this beginning, we're not asked to do more. We're asked to pay attention. What are the habits, both good and not so good, shaping your parenting today? What emotional loops are on autopilot? Where are the tiny opportunities to create change without breaking your whole life open? Because parenting is not a sprint toward perfection. It's a quiet journey of repetitions. And Chapter 1 of Atomic Habits reminds us, even if you're exhausted, even if nothing seems to be changing, your tiny actions are already shaping something beautiful. When we think of change, whether in ourselves or our children, we often focus on the outcomes: better behavior, improved routines, more patience, fewer tantrums. But Chapter 2 invites us to go deeper. James Clear shifts the spotlight from results to identity. He says, true change doesn't start with what you want to achieve, it begins with who you believe you are. This is powerful for any reader. But for a parent? It's transformative. Instead of asking, "How can I get my child to listen?" this chapter invites us to ask, What kind of parent do I want to become? Do I want to be the calm parent? The consistent one? The present one? Because once we begin to see ourselves that way, even in small glimpses, our actions start to align. Clear explains the difference between outcome-based habits and identity-based habits. Outcomes focus on what you want to get. Identity focuses on who you want to be. And this subtle shift makes all the difference. Because it's one thing to say, I want to yell less. It's another to say, I'm becoming a parent who communicates calmly. Think of the child who's told every day, you're so lazy, or you're always messy. Over time, they start to internalize that identity. Their actions become a reflection of what they believe to be true. Now flip that. What if the child begins hearing, you're someone who tries hard? Or, you're thoughtful and observant. Even if they fall short, those words begin to shape how they see themselves. An identity is sticky. It clings. It guides. This chapter reminds us that every habit casts a vote for the person we're becoming. So, when you wake up and choose not to reach for your phone first, but instead check in with your child, that's a vote for the kind of parent you want to be. When you pause before reacting to a spilled drink and choose patience over punishment, another vote. No one habit changes everything, but over time, they add up. And here's the beauty rewrite your identity. This works not just for us, but for our kids. We can help them build habits not by controlling outcomes, but by nurturing identity. Instead of saying, clean up your toys, we might say, let's be someone who takes care of our space. Instead of, do your homework, it becomes, you're the kind of person who follows through. Slowly, gently, those words shape belief. Belief becomes behavior. Behavior becomes habit. And this applies even when we mess up. Because we will. But identity-based change gives us something to return to. Not a checklist, but a compass. When we snap or slip, we can come back and say, that's not who I want to be. And that's powerful modeling for our kids, too. So, what kind of family do you want to be building? What story are your daily actions telling your children about who they are, and who you are? James Clear reminds us, real change is identity change. Want to become a more connected, patient, present parent? Begin by telling yourself, that's who I'm becoming. And then let every small choice, every habit, be a quiet vote for that version of you. Because in parenting, it's never about getting it all right. It's about becoming, one tiny decision at a time, the parent your child will remember, not for perfection, but for presence and consistency. It's easy to think that success in parenting comes from sheer willpower, more patience, more energy, more discipline. But as Chapter 3 gently reminds us, it's not about pushing harder. It's about designing systems that quietly support who we're trying to become. James Clear says it clearly, you do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. That idea, simple but profound, holds immense weight for families. Because parenting isn't just about big intentions, it's about the patterns we repeat in everyday life. Think of the mornings that feel chaotic. You wake up a little late, kids aren't dressed, backpacks are half-packed, someone's crying about socks. The tension rises, voices get sharp, and the day begins frayed. It's not because you're a bad parent, it's because the system didn't support a peaceful morning with a few tiny systems in place. Outfits laid out the night before. Lunches prepped in advance. A 5-minute cuddle before the rush. Nothing dramatic, but just enough to shift the energy. You didn't try harder, you changed the setup. That's a parenting system. Clear encourages us to think less about goals and more about the habits that lead there. Want your child to be more responsible? Build a system that gives them small ownership every day, a chore chart, a check-in ritual, a reward for following through. Want more connection as a family? Design a routine, like reading aloud every night or Saturday pancake breakfasts, that creates consistency without effort. And here's the magic, systems take the pressure off discipline. You're not constantly correcting or nagging because the environment does part of the work. A bowl by the door catches the keys so no one's late. A screen time tracker keeps the battles at bay. These aren't rules. They're rhythms. And kids thrive in rhythms. James also touches on the importance of environment shaping behavior. He tells us that if we want to change our habits, we should change our surroundings. That speaks directly to parenting. If you want your kids to read more, leave books where they can see and reach them. If you want healthier meals, prep visible snacks they can grab. If you want calmer evenings, dim the lights, slow the music, and invite quiet in, not through commands, but through design. This chapter helps us realize, behavior follows the path of least resistance. The more friction there is, the harder it becomes to stay consistent. So instead of trying to be a perfect parent through willpower, why not be a peaceful one through preparation? Think of your household like a garden. Goals are the flowers, they look beautiful. But systems? Those are the soil, the water, the daily sunlight. Without them, no matter how much you wish or will, the flowers struggle. But when the systems are healthy, growth feels natural. You can breathe again. And this applies to children, too. When they act out, forget, resist, it's not always because they lack motivation. It's often because the system makes the right choice hard. So we can help them by making good choices easy. Clear routines. Visual cues. Consistent rhythms. Less yelling, more scaffolding. In the end, Chapter 3 reminds us, your outcomes are a lagging measure of your systems. If your mornings are chaotic, don't punish yourself, adjust the flow. If your connection feels off, don't blame your child, rework the routine. You don't need more goals. You need better support. Because in parenting, just like in life, small systems, designed with love, shape the people. The most powerful changes come not from what we do, but from what we notice. In Chapter 4, James Clear begins to explain the first law of behavior change, make it obvious. And in parenting, this idea is a quiet superpower. Habits don't start with action, they start with a cue. A trigger. Something you see, feel, or experience that nudges your brain to say, it's time to do this thing. And often, we don't even realize it's happening. We walk into the kitchen and reach for a snack. We hear a ding and check our phone. These cues are everywhere, shaping our choices without asking for permission. Now imagine how this plays out in parenting. Your child throws their backpack on the floor when they come home, not because they want to be messy, but because the cue has become invisible. There's no hook, no reminder, no habit pathway. But what if the hook was by the door? What if the routine was clear and visible? The cue becomes obvious, and the behavior becomes automatic. James teaches us that the first step to building a habit is becoming aware of what triggers it. He introduces something called a habit scorecard, a way to write down and observe your current habits without judgment. For parents, this can be a revealing exercise. What happens every morning in your home? Every bedtime? What's working, and what's quietly unraveling your peace? When you see your patterns clearly, you can start to shift them. But not by forcing change, by making the right cues more visible. Let's say you want to start reading to your child every night. If the book is buried in a drawer, you'll probably forget. But if you leave it on their pillow every morning, it becomes part of the scenery, part of the routine. That's the secret. When a cue is obvious, the habit feels natural. Or maybe you want to stop reacting sharply during stressful moments. You can use a physical cue, like a bracelet or a sticky note on the fridge, to remind you to pause and breathe. It doesn't have to be dramatic. It just has to exist. Because your brain is always scanning the environment for signals. And when those signals support the parent you want to be, the change begins to stick. This chapter also gently reminds us that our children are watching our cues too. If your phone is always out, that becomes the norm. If your tone shifts the moment you're stressed, that becomes predictable. But if your habits are visible, kindness, presence, intentionality, they begin to mirror those same cues back to you. You can even help your children build their own cues. A checklist by the door for what to pack. A light dimming ritual that says, it's time to wind down. A consistent breakfast setup that encourages independence. You're not nagging, you're shaping their world to support their struggles. Struggles aren't about willpower, they're about unclear cues. Kids don't know what's expected. Parents forget what matters. And the day gets swept up in reaction. But Chapter 4 shows us a gentler path. Design your environment to make the right thing obvious. Want more connection? Make time together visible. Want more peace? Put reminders in the space where stress shows up. Want more cooperation from your kids? Show them what the habit looks like, clearly, kindly, consistently. Because when the cue is clear, the habit begins to grow, not through pressure, but through presence. Sometimes, we intend to do the right thing, to speak calmly, to read with our child, to prepare dinner before the day runs away, but somehow, it slips past us. Not because we're lazy or forgetful, but because the intention wasn't anchored. It floated, untethered, amid the noise of daily life. Chapter 5 gives us the tools to change that. James Clear introduces implementation intentions, a simple but powerful technique where you declare when and where you will do a new habit. Not just, I'll play with my child more, but, after I load the dishwasher at 7 p.m., I'll play a board game with my daughter for 15 minutes. This small shift turns vague intentions into visible behaviors. For parents, this is a quiet superpower. Life doesn't slow down. But habits can help us pause. Embedding new behaviors into our routine means we no longer have to rely on memory or motivation. We just follow the rhythm we created. The beauty is in the clarity. When you say, after school drop-off, I'll sit quietly for 2 minutes before jumping into work, you're not squeezing one more thing in, you're giving your nervous system a cue. A breath. A place to start. Then comes habit stacking, one of the most parent-friendly ideas in the book. This method links a new habit to something you're already doing. If you always brew coffee in the morning, stack a new habit on top. While the coffee brews, I'll write one kind note for my child's lunchbox. If you always brush your child's teeth before bed, you might say, after brushing, we'll share one thing we're thankful for. You're not adding time, you're anchoring meaning. Parenting is already full of routines. The question is whether those routines are building connection, or simply checking boxes. Habit stacking helps you gently layer intention onto what already exists. And this can work beautifully with children too. Want them to tidy up their toys? Link it to something they already expect. After we finish the bedtime story, we'll spend 2 minutes cleaning up together. Over time, the chain becomes automatic, and resistance fades, not because you enforced it, but because you built it in. James reminds us that the brain loves predictability. When it knows what's coming next, it relaxes. For kids, this consistency feels like safety. For parents, it feels like patient during transitions, the morning rush, the evening meltdowns. Instead of trying to change your whole emotional response, start with a stacked habit. When I notice myself tensing up, I'll place my hand on my heart and take one deep breath. That tiny habit, anchored to a familiar cue, creates a new emotional pathway. And over time, those small, intentional steps don't just change your behavior, they change your identity. You begin to see yourself as someone who shows up calmly, who stays present, who keeps promises, even the quiet ones made only to yourself. That's the beauty of Chapter 5. It doesn't ask you to do more. It simply invites you to place your best intentions in the spaces where life is already happening. To layer purpose over autopilot. To create rhythm in the chaos. Because when you begin to attach meaningful habits to your everyday moments, parenting becomes less about reacting, and more about gently shaping the people you're raising, and the person you're becoming. We often think of change as something that comes from inside, a mindset shift, a moment of clarity, or a sudden burst of willpower. But Chapter 6 gently flips that idea on its head. James Clear tells us that more often than not, our environment shapes our behavior far more than our internal resolve. And for parents, this is quietly revolutionary. Picture your home. The sights, the sounds, the routines. Not just the intentional spaces, like the dinner table or the toy bin, but the unnoticed ones too, the counters piled with mail, the cluttered shoe rack, the TV that stays on long after bedtime. These things speak. They send signals. And those signals are what your habits, and your child's habits, respond to. Clear explains that every habit is context-dependent. We tend to think of habits as self-control problems, when in truth, they're often environment design problems. If the cookies are on the counter, we eat them. If the phone is in the bedroom, we scroll. If the TV is on, we zone out. The cue is right there, ready to activate the routine. Now bring that into parenting. Let's say you want to encourage more reading in your home. You could lecture, nag, or beg, or you could place inviting books in your child's favorite spaces. You could create a cozy corner with soft pillows and a lamp, and suddenly, reading doesn't feel like a rule, it feels like a retreat. Or maybe you want less screen time. You could set timers and argue about limits. Or you could make screens harder to access, move them out of sight, use app blockers, create tech baskets for shared use. The point isn't to control behavior through force. It's to guide behavior through to become architects of our environment. That doesn't mean redesigning your entire house. It means being intentional. If you want your child to be more independent in the morning, make their lunchbox shelf reachable. Use picture labels on drawers. Set their clothes out the night before. You're not yelling less, you're needing to yell less, because the structure is doing the work. And it works for our own parenting habits, too. If you want to journal, keep your notebook visible. If you want to respond with more calm, keep a reminder card in the place where stress shows up, the kitchen, the car, the bathroom mirror. Environment isn't just physical, it's emotional. It holds your attention. And attention becomes action. Clear also highlights the power of context cues. He explains that the same behavior often doesn't carry over into a new environment, because our habits are tightly tied to the spaces we associate them with. This is why it can feel so hard to parent consistently when you're on vacation, or when the usual rhythm is disrupted. The cues are missing. But there's hope in that, too. Because it means if you want to change a habit, yours or your child's, you can do it more effectively by changing the setting. Want a peaceful bedtime? Create a wind-down zone that's visually quiet. Dim the lights. Reduce clutter. Add soft textures. That space becomes a cue. Ultimately, Chapter 6 reminds us of something deeply practical and profoundly emotional. We are not just shaping our children with our words, we are shaping them with the world we create around them. And that world doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be Pinterest-worthy. It just has to be intentional. Because when your environment supports your values, your family starts to move in rhythm, not just with rules, but with ease. Every parent knows the frustration of trying to stop a bad habit. Whether it's your own, like snapping at your child when you're overwhelmed, or your child's, like whining, procrastinating, or clinging to screens. Sometimes it feels like no matter how much you want to stop, you just don't. That's because, as James Clear explains in Chapter 7, you can't change a habit you're constantly reminded of. Habits, both good and bad, are triggered by cues in the environment. And when those cues are always in front of us, resisting them becomes exhausting. So instead of relying on willpower, Clear offers us a kinder strategy: make the cues invisible. Let's bring that idea into real parenting life. If you find yourself scrolling your phone when your child is trying to talk to you, not because you mean to, but because your phone is always right there, that's a cue problem. You don't need to be more disciplined. You just need to change the cue. Maybe you put the phone in another room after dinner. Or keep it face down on a shelf. Out of sight, out of mind becomes more than a saying, and it becomes a tool for connection. If they're constantly reaching for snacks just before dinner, maybe it's not because they're defiant, maybe it's because the snacks are the first thing they see. If toys are everywhere, and they bounce from one mess to another, maybe they're not scattered, maybe the clutter is their cue. In both cases, the solution isn't control. It's invisibility. Remove the visual triggers. Put the snacks away. Keep playtime bins stored and bring out just one or two options at a time. Create a visual rhythm that supports attention and peace. James Clear encourages us to use inversion of the first law: just as we make good habits obvious, we make bad ones invisible. This doesn't mean hiding from the problem, it means disarming the trigger before it pulls. There's freedom in this idea. Because parenting can feel like a game of reaction, constantly correcting behaviors, repeating rules, chasing after the same old patterns. But what if we paused and asked, what's triggering this? What's the cue behind the meltdown, the resistance, the mess? And what if, instead of discipline, we focused first on design? This could look like moving devices out of bedrooms to reduce late-night scrolling, yours or theirs. Turning off autoplay on streaming apps so one episode doesn't become 5. Replacing a basket of sweets on the counter with a bowl of fruit. Setting up a visual morning checklist so the routine speaks louder than your reminders. It's not about being strict. It's about being strategic and soft. And this works for emotional habits, too. If your cue to frustration is the 5 p.m. rush, maybe your solution is a cup of tea waiting for you, or calming music playing in the background. You're not eliminating stress. You're removing the emotional cue that spirals into yelling, snapping, or shutting down. Clear doesn't promise perfection. He reminds us that cues will always be part of our lives. But when we learn to gently reshape them, to hide the things that pull us away from who we want to be, we start making space for better patterns to grow. Because sometimes, the best way to stop a bad habit isn't to fight it head-on. It's to quietly make it disappear. And in parenting, where emotions run high and the to-do list never ends, invisibility becomes a gift. A small shift that makes peace just a little easier. Part of building a good habit is just starting. We know what we should do: read to our kids, eat dinner as a family, show more patience, but motivation runs low. Energy is scattered. And the right choice feels heavy. That's where Chapter 8 shines. James Clear introduces the second law of behavior change: make it attractive. And when we're parenting, especially in long seasons of exhaustion, this idea matters more than we realize. Humans are wired to follow what feels good. That doesn't mean indulgent or impulsive, it means rewarding. And children? Even more so. If something feels fun, meaningful, or relational, they'll come running. If it feels like a chore, you'll be chasing them instead. So how do we use this in parenting? Clear introduces the idea of temptation bundling, linking something you should do with something you want to do. Imagine you want to spend more intentional time with your child, but you're always tired at the end of the day. What if you paired that time with something you enjoy too? Listening to music while cooking together. Playing a board game with snacks. Reading while snuggling under a blanket. The moment becomes attractive, not just for them, but for you. Even routines like getting ready in the morning can be reshaped. Instead of barking instructions, turn it into a dance challenge. Instead of dragging your child to clean their room, turn it into a 5-minute race with a favorite song. The habit doesn't change, the feeling around it does. Clear also reminds us that behavior is influenced by what's socially attractive. We imitate those we admire, and we want to belong to the groups we value. This is where family culture quietly teaches more than lectures ever could. If your family celebrates kindness, helpfulness, or curiosity as something we do, kids naturally want to align. They're not just following rules, they're becoming part of something. So when you say, in our family, we try again when things are hard, you're not punishing mistakes, you're shaping identity. That's why parenting with connection matters. Because kids follow who they feel safe with. If brushing teeth, tidying up, or reading is always paired with nagging or frustration, they'll resist. But if those same actions are wrapped in attention, presence, or fun, suddenly, they want to be part of it. It's not about tricking our kids. It's about giving their brains, and ours, a reason to engage. And it applies to our habits too. Let's say you want to start journaling or meditating in the morning, but the bed is too warm and your energy is low. What if you paired the habit with your favorite coffee, a candle, or your coziest blanket? You're not forcing discipline, you're building attraction. Over time, that reward loop makes the habit feel the more attractive a habit is, the more likely it is to become part of who we are. In parenting, this means, the more joy, meaning, and connection we pair with daily routines, the more likely our kids are to repeat them. Not out of fear or force, but because it feels good to do so. So instead of asking, how do I make my child listen, maybe ask, how can I make this moment more inviting? Because when habits are attractive, they become sustainable. And when they're sustainable, they shape not just behavior, but character. If Chapter 8 taught us that we're drawn to habits that feel rewarding, Chapter 9 goes deeper, explaining why some habits become irresistible, even when they're hard. The answer? Because they're socially accepted. Because they make us feel like we belong. James Clear shows us that we tend to adopt habits from three groups. The close, our family and friends. The many, the culture or majority. And the powerful, those we admire or aspire to be like. As parents, this insight is a quiet key to shaping both our children's habits, and our own. Start with the first group, the close. The habits your children are most likely to adopt aren't the ones you tell them to do, they're the ones they see you doing. If they see you reading, reflecting, apologizing, practicing gratitude, those behaviors become familiar. Not because you preach them, but because you practice them. This goes both ways. If yelling is normal, it becomes modeled. If stress is handled by snapping or shutting down, kids pick up that pattern, silently, automatically. But when they see deep breathing, healthy disagreement, affection, or repair, those emotional habits quietly embed into their identity. So the real question isn't just, what kind of habits do I want my child to have? It's, what kind of habits are they watching in me? And that's not meant to bring guilt. It's meant to offer hope. Because if you want to change your child's habits, you don't need to lecture them. You can just start becoming the kind of parent whose habits feel worth imitating. Next comes the second group, the many, the social norms we're surrounded by. Children, especially, are wired to imitate their peers. If everyone watches certain shows, dresses a certain way, skips chores, that becomes the norm. But as parents, we can shape this group by curating the voices around our kids. Books, shows, routines, conversations, even family friends, these become part of their social reality. When kindness is praised, when cooperation is expected, when effort is celebrated more than perfection, kids begin to see those habits as what we do. And the brain, craving belonging, naturally follows. Finally, we're drawn to habits modeled by the powerful, the admired. This could be a parent, a teacher, a coach, or even a character in a story. Children watch for strength, consistency, calm. They notice who gets attention. Who gets results. And when they admire someone, they absorb not just their traits, but their habits. This is why our tone matters. Our follow-through. The way we handle hard moments. Because when your child respects you, they don't just hear your words, they absorb your example. James Clear reminds us that habits aren't just personal, they're cultural. They spread through observation, imitation, and shared experience. So if you're trying to introduce a new habit at home, say, family reading, gratitude journaling, or screen-free dinners, don't do it alone. Invite your child in. Make it a we habit, not just a rule they have to follow. Let them be part of the creation. And make sure they see you doing it too. Because when habits make us feel like we're part of something good, something shared, they don't just stick. They shape who we believe we are. And isn't that what parenting is really about? Not perfect behavior, but a strong sense of identity. In this family, we care for one another. In this family, we slow down. In this family, we grow together. That's how we make good habits attractive, not just through reward, but through relationship. Parenting is often filled with routines that feel like obligations: brushing teeth, picking up toys, homework, bedtime. We do them because we have to. But what if the secret to making these routines stick, for both us and our kids, wasn't pressure, but pleasure? In Chapter 10, James Clear gently explains that the brain doesn't just respond to rewards after a habit, it learns to crave them before the habit even begins. That craving is what pulls us in. And when we apply this to our home life, we start to see that the habits that last aren't just useful, they're emotionally attractive. Think about the habits you do without thinking: scrolling your phone, checking email, snacking. They all have one thing in common: your brain associates them with relief, stimulation, or comfort. The reward has been paired with the cue for so long, you crave the feeling before the action even starts. Now think about the positive habits you want in your parenting life, like reading to your child, being more patient, or preparing meals without stress. These habits often feel like a burden not because they're hard, but because we haven't yet attached the feeling of reward to them. So here's where the magic happens: pair the habit with something you love. Make the action feel good, even before journaling after your kids go to bed. Pair it with something you look forward to: a cup of tea, a soft light, your favorite cozy blanket. If you want your child to clean up, turn it into a game. If you want to move your body more, play your favorite music while tidying the house together. It's not about bribery. It's about emotional association. James shares that the human brain is always predicting outcomes, asking, what will this experience feel like? If the experience feels neutral or negative, your motivation drops. But if it feels energizing, calming, fun, or satisfying, your brain will begin to crave it before it even starts. This is especially powerful with children. Want to build a habit of gratitude? Don't make it a lecture. Make it a bedtime ritual: 3 things you each name while cuddling in the dark. Want them to eat healthier? Let them help choose or prepare the food. Want more quiet time? Pair it with a candle, soft music, or shared silence with you nearby. Over time, those tiny emotional cues become cravings, and the habit becomes a comfort, not a task. Clear also reminds us that emotion is the engine of habit. If you want a habit to stick, it has to feel good at some level. This doesn't mean it's always easy, but it has to be emotionally reinforcing. A sense of peace, pride, connection, growth, these are all rewards worth returning to. So when you think about your parenting habits, both the ones you're trying to build and the ones you're modeling, ask yourself, what feeling is connected to this habit? What craving am I creating? Because ultimately, parenting isn't about forcing routines. It's about building rhythms that feel like home, emotionally, physically, and relationally. When your child begins to crave the feeling of connection after school because you always check in. When they start to look forward to quiet mornings because they see you lighting a candle and sitting with intention, when you, as a parent, begin to crave the small wins that follow a deep breath instead of a shout, that's when change becomes lasting. Because in the world of habits, craving is the signal that something is emotionally worth of spare energy. Between meals, tantrums, homework, laundry, and the quiet pressure to do it all right, change can feel overwhelming. Even small habits that seem simple, like reading a parenting book, going on a walk, or practicing deep breathing, often fall to the bottom of the list. But Chapter 11 offers a comforting shift in mindset. James Clear tells us that successful habit formation doesn't come from pushing harder. It comes from removing friction, making the habit so easy to begin, you don't need willpower to get started. The brain naturally follows the path of least resistance. If a habit is hard, you'll delay it. If it's simple, you'll begin. And once you begin, momentum takes over. For parents, this law can be a game changer. Think about the habits you want to build into your day: more presence, more play, less yelling, more order. Instead of asking, "How do I do this perfectly?" try asking, "How do I make this easier to begin?" Clear explains that habit formation is like casting a vote for who you want to become. And each vote doesn't have to be huge. In fact, it shouldn't be. You win the day with tiny wins. Want to be more present with your child? Leave your phone in another room and sit with them for 2 minutes. That's it. Not 30 minutes of crafts and deep conversation, just 2 intentional minutes. That's the first vote. Want to eat better as a family? Don't start with a full meal plan overhaul. Just cut veggies in advance so they're easy to grab after school. Lower the friction. Want more calm in the house? Place a sticky note by the sink that says, "Breathe," so that while the dishes pile up, you remember to center yourself. Clear also introduces the idea of the 2-minute rule. It means you start any new habit with a version that takes less than 2 minutes. If you want to start journaling, your first habit isn't write a full page, it's open the journal. If you want to meditate, don't begin with 15 minutes of silence. Just sit and take one conscious breath. Because once you're in motion, continuing becomes easier than starting again. This is crucial for parenting because time and energy are in short supply. But when you scale your habits down to the easiest version, you take away the emotional weight. There's no more inner argument, just a tiny action that feels doable. And what about our kids? This law applies to them too. If you want your child to clean up, break the task down. Put the blocks in this basket is easier than clean your room. If you want them to read more, leave books out and choose ones they love. If you want better transitions, create microhabits, a song that signals it's time to tidy, a timer that gives warning, a high five when they follow through. Kids, like adults, respond better to habits that are easy to begin. The challenge isn't always in finishing, it's in starting, not perfection, is what builds identity. So when you show up, even for 2 minutes, as a calmer parent, a more patient one, a more intentional one, you're building something powerful. You're telling your brain, "This is who I am now." You're telling your child, "This is what we do." And slowly, through small acts that are easy to start and simple to repeat, you build the kind of parenting life that doesn't rely on pressure, but on gentle, daily momentum. Because at the end of the day, it's not about doing more. It's about making it easier to do what already matters. If you've ever felt like your parenting life is a loop of constant reminders, repeated instructions, and decision fatigue, you're not alone. Routines that should feel simple, like getting out the door, calming down after school, or managing screen time, somehow drain more energy than they should. Chapter 12 offers a quiet revolution. What if you could build a habit once and never think about it again? That's the magic of automation. James Clear reminds us that humans are not designed to make fresh decisions every day. We thrive on systems that run automatically, like brushing our teeth or buckling our seatbelt. When something becomes second nature, it frees up our energy for more meaningful moments. In parenting, this is a gift. Because willpower fades. But structure stays. Automation means designing your environment or commitments in a way that removes decision-making entirely. For example, if you want your family to eat better, you don't decide every night, you meal prep on Sunday. If you want to be more present, you set app limits or use a lockbox for your phone during family time. You don't have to decide later, you decide once. Clear highlights the power of using one-time actions to lock in a behavior. These are habits you build once that pay off again and again. Imagine setting up a family calendar that everyone can see: morning routines, screen-free blocks, reading time. You're no longer negotiating every task. You've created a shared system. Or creating a launch pad by the front door, shoes, backpacks, jackets, all in one place. Suddenly, the morning chaos softens. You don't have to remind your child every day, the system speaks for you. Automation also means simplifying your choices. Fewer steps. Less friction. The more seamless the habit, the less resistance you or your child will feel. Want your child to pack their own lunch? Organize the fridge with bins labeled for each item. Want to start a morning reflection? Keep a journal on the breakfast table. Want to meditate more often? Leave the cushion right where you'll trip over it. You're not just designing a home, you're designing technology-based automation, subscriptions, reminders, and devices that take the thinking out of repetition. In parenting, this could look like using a recurring grocery list that includes the essentials. Setting phone alarms for shared habits, like bedtime routines or reading breaks. Automating bill payments or responsibilities so your brain can breathe. The deeper message is this: the more automatic your habits, the more energy you save for what really matters: connection, calm, creativity. This doesn't mean every part of parenting can be automated, far from it. But when the basics are supported by structure, you can stop reacting, and start responding with intention. Clear gently reminds us that motivation comes and goes. But when the system is strong, success doesn't require perfect conditions. You just keep moving forward, even when you're tired, even when the day feels heavy, because the groundwork is already holding you up. And that's what we long for in parenting, isn't it? Not perfection. Just peace. Not control. Just support. With automation, the invisible parts of your life start to run smoothly, so you can show up with more heart in the moments that matter. There's something comforting about a good plan. The color-coded schedule, the Pinterest-worthy routine chart, the list of parenting books we hope to read one day. Planning gives us a sense of control. It feels productive. Safe. Smart. But James Clear opens chapter 13 with a bold truth: motion is not the same as action. And when it comes to parenting, that difference matters more than we think. Motion is preparing. Action is doing. Motion is researching toddler sleep. Action is turning off the screen and starting the new routine. Motion is talking about better communication. Action is sitting down with your child and truly listening. Clear reminds us that motion doesn't lead to results, action does. And we avoid action, often without realizing it, because it feels risky. When we take action, we expose ourselves to failure, to imperfection, to the fear that what we try might not work. But in parenting, trying, even imperfectly, is everything. Think about the habits you've been meaning to build as a parent: more presence, less yelling, better structure, stronger connection. Chances are, you've thought about them. Maybe even journaled about them. But if they haven't become real, it's likely because the motion hasn't turned into movement. Clear invites us to stop hiding in preparation, and start doing, even if it's messy. Want to improve bedtime? Don't wait until the perfect day. Just start tonight. Read one story. Turn off the lights 5 minutes earlier. That's action. Want to yell less? Don't wait until you feel calm. Try breathing once before you speak, even if it's clumsy. Want to build a gratitude habit with your child? Don't search for the best journal. Just ask at dinner, what made you smile today? That's action. And in the doing, something powerful happens: identity begins to shift. You're no longer just a parent who wants to be more present, you are a parent who paused and showed up. You're not just planning better habits, you're living them. Clear also encourages us to focus less on outcome-based thinking and more on process-based doing. Instead of obsessing over how long it'll take to change, just commit to the next small step. Build consistency first, clarity and momentum will follow. For busy parents, this is freeing. You don't have to overhaul your life. You just have to take the next 2-minute action. This might look like Sitting beside your child while they play, even if you're tired. Leaving your phone in another room for 1 hour. Speaking kindly, even once, when you feel like snapping. Reading one page instead of waiting for the perfect quiet moment. Because habits aren't built in theory. They're built in practice. Clear's message is clear: start small. But start. Don't overthink the system. Let your habits evolve as you go. Just move. In parenting, motion without action keeps us stuck, in guilt, in stress, in overwhelm. But action, even tiny, unlocks something deeper: progress, confidence, peace. So instead of asking, what's the perfect way to begin, try asking, what's the simplest thing I can do today to begin becoming the parent I want to be? And then, do it. There's a quiet pressure that follows so many parenting moments, the sense that if we can't do something well, we shouldn't bother doing it at all. If we don't have time for a full bedtime routine, we skip the story. If we can't cook a balanced dinner, we order out. If we forget to stay calm once, we assume we've failed. But in chapter 14, James Clear offers something far more forgiving. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be consistent. This chapter reminds us that habits are less about quality and more about frequency. The more often you repeat a behavior, the faster it becomes automatic, even if that repetition is clumsy, short, or incomplete. Let's bring that into parenting. You want to connect with your child every evening. But one night you only have 5 minutes. Another night, they're grumpy. Another, you forget. But then, you try again. You show up. Maybe not perfectly, but consistently. And that rhythm, not the flawless routine, becomes the habit. Clear shares a concept called automaticity, which is a fancy word for how habits become second nature through repetition. The more we do something, the less effort it takes. Over time, brushing your child's hair, packing their lunch, responding calmly, all these actions become natural, not because they're easy, but because you've practiced. Repetition builds fluency. And in parenting, fluency brings peace. To begin. You just have to begin, again and again. Think of a toddler learning to walk. They don't get discouraged because they wobble. They get better because they keep going. Why do we, as parents, expect ourselves to get it right on the first try? Clear encourages us to focus less on intensity and more on showing up daily, even in a small way. If you want to build a habit of staying calm in conflict, don't wait until you've mastered the perfect response. Just pause for one breath before replying. That repetition will train your nervous system to slow down. If you want to cultivate gratitude in your home, you don't need a fancy journal or long ritual. A simple, "What was your favorite part of today?" asked over and over, becomes a habit that shifts perspective. And when you miss a day, don't panic. Don't shame yourself. Just show up the next day. James warns us against the all-or-nothing mindset. The idea that if we mess up once, we've failed entirely. But missing once is normal. Missing twice is when a new habit starts to break. So the rule is simple: never miss twice. If bedtime got skipped last night, recommit tonight. If you lost your temper this morning, repair it this afternoon. If you forgot the routine yesterday, try again today. Not to be perfect, but to be consistent. Because the parent you want to become isn't built in one grand moment. It's built in these ordinary acts, repeated in love, over time. And your child? They don't need a perfect version of you. They need a present one. One who shows up, again and again, even when it's hard, even when it's messy. That's how trust is built. That's how habits form. That's how we grow. Parenting is full of things we do for the long-term good, helping our kids learn, grow, behave, and flourish. But often, those good decisions feel hard in the moment. There's no instant payoff for staying calm during a tantrum. No gold star for patiently repeating the bedtime routine. That's where chapter 15 steps in with compassion. James Clear explains that the human brain is wired to repeat what feels satisfying now. Not later. Not someday. But in the moment. This is why bad habits are often so sticky, the reward is immediate. Scrolling your phone gives a hit of stimulation. Skipping the chore gives relief. Snapping at your child releases frustration. But the long-term cost? Disconnection. Chaos. Guilt. Good habits, on the other hand, the ones that build better families, usually have delayed rewards. You don't see the results of consistent bedtime routines until months later. You don't feel the benefits of patient parenting until after the storm has passed. You can shift that. Clear invites us to add a small, satisfying reward immediately after the habit. This closes the feedback loop and makes the brain say, let's do that again. So what does this look like in parenting? Let's say you want to start affirming your child's behavior more often. After you praise them, you could give a high five, share a smile, or write it in your own gratitude journal. That little burst of joy reinforces the act. Or maybe you're working on staying calm. Each time you breathe through frustration instead of shouting, reward yourself. It could be something as simple as saying to yourself, that was growth. Or putting a check mark on a habit tracker. Or making a cup of tea. The point isn't the reward itself, it's that the action felt good. Clear says that, what is immediately rewarded is repeated. So if we want our good parenting habits to stick, reading to our child, listening without interrupting, choosing play over screens, we need to make them emotionally satisfying in the moment. And this works beautifully with children, too. If your child cleans up without being asked, praise them warmly right away. If they try again after failing, celebrate their effort immediately. If they show kindness, give that moment your full attention. The reward doesn't have to be candy or stickers. It can be a hug, a fist bump, a proud smile, or simply your presence. Because what children crave most is connection. And when that connection follows a good habit, the behavior is far more likely to return. Clear also introduces the idea of a habit tracker, a visual way to mark your progress. For parents, this can be a powerful motivator. Imagine tracking how many days you've read aloud with your child, how often you've spoken with intention, how many mornings you've kept your cool. Watching those checkmarks build creates momentum and satisfaction. Because progress is deeply satisfying. Even small progress. Especially small progress. And in a season of life where so much of parenting feels like planting seeds without seeing fruit, this chapter reminds us to find joy in the doing, not just the result. Every time you follow through on a small parenting habit, staying present, pausing before reacting, encouraging instead of criticizing, find a way to make it feel good. Not because you're perfect. But because you showed up. Because you tried. Because you're slowly becoming the parent your child will remember, not for the goals you set, but for the love you made visible like a solo mission some days. You're in the trenches, answering questions, cleaning messes, guiding behavior, all while trying to hold yourself together. And yet, many of the most powerful changes we make in our lives don't happen alone. Chapter 16 introduces a quiet but motivating truth: we are more likely to stick with good habits when someone else is watching, or when the habit is socially reinforced. James Clear explains this through the idea of accountability. When we make our behavior visible to others, we become more likely to follow through, not because we fear punishment, but because we naturally want to live up to expectations, belong, and be consistent with our words. For parents, this is both a challenge and an opportunity. Let's say you want to become more intentional about family meals, eating together, talking without screens, building rhythm. It's easy to skip a night or two when no one notices. But if your child comes to expect it, and even reminds you, it becomes a shared commitment. That's the magic of social accountability. It transforms a private intention into a family identity. You can even tell your child what habit you're working on. I'm trying to stay calm when things get messy. Or, I'm practicing listening more without interrupting. Suddenly, you're not just trying to be better in silence, you're modeling the process of growth. Your child becomes part of your journey. And when they see you trying, they often rise to meet you. Clear also highlights the idea of immediate social reward. It's one thing to build a habit that helps you in the long term, but when you receive validation, recognition, or encouragement right away, your brain lights up. That satisfaction deepens the habit groove. So in parenting, one of the most powerful things we can do is make positive habits feel seen. If your partner is trying to be more present with the kids, notice it. Say it. Celebrate it. If your child remembers to tidy up without being asked, smile and name the behavior, you cleaned up on your own. That shows responsibility. These small acknowledgments, not just praise, but recognition, are emotional rewards. And they reinforce the kind of family culture you're trying to build. And this works in reverse, too. If you're working on a habit, maybe reading with your child every night, you might set up a gentle system of accountability. A wall calendar you check off together. A book club with another parent. Even sharing your goal with a friend so they can ask about habit contract, a light commitment made visible, often with another person involved. For parenting, this doesn't need to be formal. It could be a shared promise with your child: we're going to do 5 minutes of quiet time together every day this week. Let's see how it feels. That agreement, that partnership, adds meaning. And meaning strengthens the habit. What this chapter ultimately teaches us is that we're more likely to follow through when our actions are part of something bigger than ourselves. We want to be consistent with who we say we are, especially when someone we care about is watching. So whether it's modeling patience, choosing kind words, or showing up daily for small rituals, remember, when habits are seen, they stick. When they're shared, they grow. You don't have to do this parenting thing alone. Invite your family into your habits, not just as observers, but as fellow travelers. Because in a home filled with trust, even the smallest good habit becomes a thread of connection, woven together, one choice at a time. In the beginning, building a habit can feel exciting. You feel hopeful, motivated, inspired by the idea of change. But what happens after the initial spark fades? When things get messy, or boring, or repetitive? That's where most good habits are abandoned. James Clear uses chapter 17 to share a quiet, powerful message: the most effective habits are the ones you're still doing long after the motivation is gone. Why? Because they feel good enough to keep. This is where satisfaction becomes essential. If a habit makes you feel proud, connected, calm, or just a little more like the parent you want to be, you're more likely to do it again. Not because someone is forcing you, but because something inside you remembers, this feels good. For example, let's say you start a ritual of reading with your child every night. At first, it might feel clunky. They fidget. You're tired. But slowly, the ritual becomes a soft spot in the day. You both begin to look forward to it, not because of discipline, but because of emotional reward. And that feeling, that warmth, that closeness, makes the habit last. That's what chapter 17 teaches us: make the habit rewarding enough to want it tomorrow. James Clear explains that a habit must feel immediately satisfying for it to survive the early days. Our brains crave closure, accomplishment, pleasure. Even something as small as checking a box or hearing kind words can be enough to seal the loop. He also encourages us to avoid relying on willpower alone. Even good intentions wear thin. What keeps a habit going is its ability to feel good consistently, not necessarily in big ways, but in small, meaningful ones. This truth becomes a gentle tool. You don't need to overhaul your routines. Just look for ways to build small satisfaction into the good you're already doing. If you're trying to use a softer tone when correcting behavior, reward yourself emotionally afterward. Remind yourself, that was love in action. Or take a deep breath and whisper, I did it differently this time. If your child is building a new habit, like sharing, reading independently, or brushing without a fuss, give them immediate feedback. Not a lecture. Not a bribe. Just recognition. Something simple like, "I noticed you tried again." That takes courage. That moment becomes the reward. Clear also discusses the idea of tracking success. Even something like crossing off a calendar day, filling in a sticker chart, or keeping a visible progress list gives the brain a burst of dopamine, a small yes that reinforces the behavior. But he's quick to warn, don't let the tracking become the goal. The goal is identity. Becoming. Growing. Loving more fully, consistently, gently. So if you miss a day, that's okay. If your routine falls apart for a week, start again. The point is not perfection. The point is repetition. Again and again, choosing the habit that aligns with who you are becoming. In parenting, the habits that stick are the ones that feed the relationship. That make us feel more in tune with ourselves and our children. That remind us we're not just reacting, we're building something deeper, day by day. So let your habits feel satisfying. Let them feel like small victories. Let them whisper, "You're doing it. It's working. Keep going." Because what you repeat becomes who you are. And the more joyful your habits feel, the more likely they are to last for a lifetime. There's a quiet truth that every parent learns eventually: even good things can start to feel hard. Even the routines that once brought connection can become stale. You find yourself going through the motions, reading the bedtime story, prepping the lunchbox, giving the gentle reminder, but the spark starts to fade. That's what chapter 18 speaks to so honestly. James Clear reminds us, the greatest threat to success isn't failure, it's boredom. And boredom is inevitable. Habits, by nature, are repetitive. They're supposed to be. That's how they work. But when the excitement wears off, when you've been showing up day after day and the results feel small, it's easy to drift. Clear gives us this gift: the most successful people in any field are not the ones who are the most motivated, they are the ones who can keep going when the motivation disappears. For parents, this feels especially true. There's no finish line. No loud applause when you choose patience for the 50th time. No award for the 1,000th peanut butter sandwich or the silent sacrifice of biting your tongue. The ones who thrive as parents aren't the ones with perfect plans. They're the ones who keep showing up. Clear encourages us to learn how to fall in love with the boredom. Not by pretending it's exciting, but by remembering that mastery lives on the other side of repetition. Think of it like this: brushing your child's hair every day is boring. But over time, it creates intimacy, routine, and care. Asking how their day went might feel repetitive, but one day, that daily question becomes the safe place they come back to when something's wrong. Setting a bedtime routine might feel like a loop, but in that loop, your child finds structure, predictability, and peace. And you? You find your power in your consistency, not in how dazzling your parenting is, but in how steady it becomes. Clear offers a simple strategy here: don't aim for perfection, aim for showing up at 80 or 90%. The goal isn't to do it perfectly every time. The goal is to keep the habit alive. He calls this the Goldilocks rule, the idea that we stay motivated when a task is just hard enough to stretch us, but not so hard that it feels impossible. If something's too easy, we get bored. Too hard, and we give up. But right in the middle, that's where growth happens. As a parent, you can apply this by adjusting your habits gently, keeping them alive, but letting them evolve as your energy and your season of life shift. If reading aloud feels like a chore some nights, switch to audiobooks. If morning routines are stale, let your child help redesign the flow. If your own habit of journaling feels flat, change the questions you ask yourself. Variety within consistency is how we stay engaged. Clear also reminds us that tracking progress, even informally, helps us see how far we've come. Maybe you're not where you want to be yet, but you're not where you were. And that movement matters. So if your habits feel boring, don't panic. Don't quit. Don't assume you're doing something wrong. You're actually doing something right. You're living in the middle, where the real change happens. Where identity is reinforced. Where your child learns, slowly and quietly, that love shows up again and again, even when no one is watching. And that's what legacy is made of. Once the routine is set, once the chaos begins to feel more manageable, it's tempting to settle in and stop paying attention. But Chapter 19 reminds us that growth isn't a destination, it's a relationship with yourself. One that deepens as you keep asking, who am I becoming? In this chapter, James Clear introduces the idea of reviewing and refining your habits over time. And for parents, especially those deep in routines that blur together, this practice offers something precious, the chance to pause, reflect, and realign. Think of it like parenting on autopilot. You've finally figured out how to get through the mornings. The lunchboxes are packed, the bedtime routine is solid, the tantrums have softened. But weeks pass. Then months. And suddenly you notice, something isn't working anymore. The routine that once brought peace is now draining you. The connection feels off. That's not failure. That's feedback. Clear invites us to review our systems. Not to judge them, but to stay in relationship with them. Ask. Is this still serving my values? Is this still working for this season? Is this helping me become the parent I want to be? For example, maybe your habit of quiet time after dinner was once restorative, but now your child is older, and they need more engagement. Or maybe your habit of doing everything yourself worked when your kids were small, but now they're capable of more, and your habits need to grow with them. That's what Chapter 19 teaches us, your habits must evolve as your identity evolves. And as a parent, your identity is always evolving. You're not just raising a child, you're raising yourself into someone wiser, more resilient, more attuned. That version of you deserves habits that match who you are now, not just who you were when you started. Clear suggests creating regular times to reflect. Maybe once a week, you journal. What habit felt good this week? What moment felt misaligned? Where did I feel like the parent I'm trying to become? This isn't about productivity. It's about integrity, making sure your habits still match your heart. Clear also explores the idea of avoiding complacency. Success, he warns, often leads to laziness. We stop refining because things are fine. But families aren't factories. They're living ecosystems. And the habits that nourish them must keep growing too. You can even involve your children in this reflection. Ask them. What do you enjoy about our routines? What feels hard or boring lately? What would you change if you could? You may be surprised how aware they are, and how willing they are to co-create new rhythms with you. This chapter is a beautiful reminder that habits are not fixed structures, they're living expressions of who we are. As your identity shifts, from tired to energized, from reactive to responsive, from overwhelmed to intentional, your habits should shift too. It's about staying in conversation with your growth. Because parenting isn't just a phase of life. It's a lifelong transformation. And the person you're becoming matters, just as much as the child you're raising. So take a breath. Step back. Look gently at your habits. And ask. Are these helping me be the kind of parent I want to be? If yes, keep going. If no, start small. Adjust. Realign. Because the most beautiful families aren't built in a rush. They're shaped by habits that reflect love, refined in honesty, and repeated with grace. We often think that greatness, whether in work, relationships, or parenting, comes from big, dramatic shifts. But in this final chapter, James Clear whispers a deeper truth: the most extraordinary outcomes come from the most ordinary habits, repeated with care. It's not about massive transformations. It's about leaning into the power of 1% improvement, day after day, moment after moment. This chapter offers one final gift, a reminder that change doesn't require you to become someone else. It invites you to return to the best version of yourself, not all at once, but through small, invisible wins that compound over time. And for parents? This is everything. Because there will always be chaos. There will always be sleepless nights, unfinished to-do lists, hard conversations, and the slow ache of wondering if what you're doing is enough. But James Clear offers a quiet reassurance: if you're showing up, even in small ways, you're moving in the right direction. You may not feel like a more patient parent today. But if you chose one moment of calm when you normally would have snapped, that's a 1% gain. You may not see your child's behavior changing. But if you're showing up with consistency, with empathy, with loving boundaries, that's a 1% gain. You may not have the perfect routine yet. But if you packed the lunch, folded the clothes, or asked the "how was your day?" with presence instead of rush, that's a 1% gain. James explains that your outcomes are a lagging measure of your habits. What you experience today is the result of yesterday's rhythms. So if you want something different in your home, in your parenting, in your own identity, start by refining the habits. No overhaul. No magic switch. Just one small step, repeated. And yes, the process will be dull at times. The habits will feel invisible. But what you're building, the trust, the safety, the resilience, the culture, will outlast the moment. Clear also explores the idea of plateaus of latent potential, those seasons where you're putting in the effort but not yet seeing the results. As a parent, this is especially meaningful. The tantrums may still come. The dishes still pile. The lessons still repeat. But beneath the surface, something is shifting. Your habits are teaching your child what love looks like. Your choices are telling your nervous system what safety feels like. Building a memory your child may not be able to name, but will carry with them forever. So don't stop. Keep showing up. Keep casting votes for the kind of parent you want to be, not perfect, not all-knowing, but intentional, growing, steady. Because Atomic Habits ends with the same wisdom that parenting begins with. Little things matter. Small steps shape identity. And who you are becoming is already unfolding, one habit, one choice, one moment at a time. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need a perfect home. You just need the willingness to begin, and the courage to repeat what matters. Because your habits will shape more than your day. They will shape your legacy. When we started this journey through Atomic Habits, it might have seemed like a book about self-improvement, behavior science, or performance. But through the lens of parenting, it becomes something deeper, a gentle guide for building a home that breathes peace, resilience, and intention. We've seen how habits aren't just tasks. They're identities in motion. When we pause before yelling, when we choose connection over correction, when we reset after a hard moment, we're not just managing behavior. We're shaping who we are. And we're showing our children what it looks like to grow. What Atomic Habits reminds us, over and over, is that we don't need to change everything. We just need to keep choosing one small thing, again and again. One breath instead of a reaction. One story read before bedtime. One apology, even when we don't know all the answers. One moment of stillness, in the chaos of a loud kitchen. These aren't minor gestures. They're the habits that form the emotional foundation of a family. So, if you're listening today and wondering, am I doing enough, let this summary reassure you. If you're trying. If you're showing up. If you're willing to begin again. You're doing more than enough. And if you build your parenting life on habits grounded in intention, habits that reflect who you want to be, not just what you want to manage, then over time, your family won't just function better. It will flourish. Let every small habit be a quiet vote for peace. For connection. For becoming. And in that quiet, consistent becoming, you'll create something far more powerful than perfection. You'll create home.